Allen Temple. It is me again, Reverend Dr. Jacqueline A. Thompson, Senior Pastor of Allen Temple Baptist Church. I have missed you. I pray that you have missed us, and I pray that you are joining us tonight from wherever you are. Please, before you do anything else, like this presentation, share it, share it, share it, share it, because we have a very exciting conversation for you tonight. But before I get into that, let me just share with you some good news. By the time we have this experience, we will have tested over 9,000 people right on our campus in deep East Oakland for COVID-19, still being active in the role of trying to fight the disease. So I'm encouraging you to continue to shelter in place, continue to wear your mask, continue to practice good hygiene, follow the protocols of the CDC. We need all of you to be safe in these days and in these times. In addition, we have two events that are coming up. Well, actually one that's going on now and one that is coming up. The first event is coming up this Saturday, July 11th at 1 p.m. Even though we are not gathering in the building, we are still on the forefront for the fight for justice. So our public ministries is sponsoring a virtual public town hall around voting and the importance of voting. And so you need to go to the church website to get more information and sign up for that. I hope to see you all there. You have to pre-register so you can get the link to make sure to be able to join us. And we are so grateful to Brother Brian White, to our education ministries, to Dr. Guest, as well as Dr. Leslie Allison, because we have a children's summer program. Grades K through 8 are getting a summer bridge experience in all of the basic subjects, K through 8. Go to the church website. If you have children who are not participating, if they need a little extra help, then we're able to provide that for them. And so I wanted to just let you know what's been going on. Also continue to keep me in prayer because I took my mom out of the care facility. I'm so happy to have her, but that's been an adjustment. So you'll see me pop in and out here and there. But God is a keeper. That is my testimony to you tonight, that God is able to keep those things that we commit to God's hand. Now for the discussion at hand. Thank you so much. So many of you have emailed and you have sent messages saying how much you've been enjoying Theological Thursdays, but you've also raised how so much of the history that have come up in several of the conversations you were not aware of. And so I thought it would be good for the month of July, not to just combine theology, but also to bring in Black history, because our people and our history is deeply connected to our faith and deeply connected to our understanding of God. So I contacted our church historian, Dr. Martha Taylor, and for the entire month of July, she is going to be hosting and leading Theological Thursdays, bringing in conversation partners from all across the United States to dig deeper into Black history. So all of those avid history folks, come on, tag them, send them a message right now, type in the chat, type their name so they'll come over and take a look and see what we're doing. So tonight is the inaugural kickoff of that series around Black history. And here is what we are dealing with in context. There are those who have suggested to us in these pandemic times that white supremacy has become a religion. There are those who would say it was always a religion. And they are suggesting that the Confederate statues and all of the conversation and debate around that has become idol worship. And so tonight, Dr. Taylor, along with our special guests, we have some amazing African-American women professors with us tonight, are going to engage in a conversation around this whole concept of the Confederate monuments, what it means to bring them down, keep them up, and the challenges around the way this discussion is taking place. So help me welcome, in the chat, type welcome to Dr. Terri Jett, who is a professor of political science at Butler University, and our very own Allen Temple member, Dr. Erika Walker, who is a professor of Black Studies at San Francisco State, and Dr. Martha Taylor, who needs no introduction. We know her, we love her. She is one of our own. My immediate predecessor is going to lead us tonight. So welcome, ladies, to all of you. So glad to have you.
Thank you. Wonderful to be here.
Absolutely.
Indeed, indeed. And so, Dr. Taylor, I am passing the microphone and baton to you so you can open us up and lead us however the conversation goes.
Oh, thank you, Pastor Jacqueline A. Thompson. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. Indeed, this is a moment in time, a moment in history when so many things are going on as it relates to the pandemic. It's not only about our health, it's economics, it's education. But when we look back at how it all impacts Black people in particularly. So tonight, I am so thankful for the opportunity to be able to engage with two giants, wonderful young women, the ones that we say that are young, gifted, and Black, Doctors Terri, Jett, and Dr. Erika Walker. Welcome, welcome, welcome to the discussion. So, ladies and gentlemen, I won't say boys and girls, but ladies and gentlemen, I greet you in the matchless name of Jesus Christ. Jesus was more than our Savior. He was a protester. He was in the revolution. So we're going to talk from a theological perspective about that role as well and what it has left us with. As most of you know, there is a lot of discussion going on nowadays, particularly about the statutes. And that was brought on with the murder of, George Floyd. It's not the first time that the discussion on Confederate statues has been brought up. So from a historical perspective and the intersection of theology and sociology, we're just going to have a little chit chat tonight. Is that all right?
Yes.
Are you ready, ladies?
Absolutely.
All right. So let's go to it from this. Everything has a historical background, as you well know. So when we look at the Confederate statues, we need to ask ourselves, where did this come from? How did it start? And actually, it all began when we look at the backdrop of the Civil War. The Civil War. The Civil War was a war that was internal to the United States, where there was a division between northern states and southern states. So we have the northern being the Union, and then there was this split with the southern states, calling themselves the Confederacy. Well, what happened? The southern states wanted to maintain their independence so that they can further keep slavery. Okay, understand that. And so then the Union was breaking off. We have a President Abraham Lincoln that had been elected. And guess what, ladies and gentlemen? He was elected without the support or even being on the ballot of the southern states. That brings up another whole discussion about, ballots, voting, and so forth. So let's kind of look at some of the notes that I have here as it relates to the Confederacy, so we get a better handle on what all of, and I use the word noise, is about in a very positive way, about dismantling what appears to be a furtherance of white supremacy. So here we have the Confederacy that was formed in February of 1861. It was composed of the 11 southern states, and then we have the northern states. The Confederacy, these southern states, wanted to remove themselves from the United States because what they wanted to do was really, underneath all of it, was to keep slavery alive. Slavery was the way of their economics. So if here we are in the throes of removing slavery as being legal, that was going to impact them negatively. So what they say, their fight wasn't so much about slavery, because they have to, people have to take history and try to make it pretty, that it was all about states' rights. It's amazing now. That whole tune is being talked about now in many ways as it relates to, COVID, whether or not there is oversight from the government, starting from the White House, or even what role does each and every state play, and where is the consistency? So this particular war went on for about 4 years, okay? Guess what? The southern states lost. They didn't like that. They lost. Now here we have the northern states, the Union. How do we embrace and bring back these southern states? Well, the southern states said, wait a minute, history has it all wrong. We weren't fighting to keep slavery alive. We were focused on trying to keep states' rights. But what rights did they want to have? It really was the right to keep slavery alive. It really was about white supremacy. So we need to be able to look back and oftentimes see when we see laws enacted, where is the negative effect on certain people? So what they wanted to do was establish a separate government and not be beholden to the Union. Well, like I said, they lost the war. And so now we have the United States split into the North and the South. Okay, so that's a little backdrop. Sometimes we will hear about the lost cause ideology that advocates for the Confederacy during this American Civil War. And that lost cause was no more than trying to flip the script on history and say, no, we weren't trying to keep slavery alive. We were attempting to have our rights. So now we have this flow of history. We have the Civil War. The Civil War has ended. So vis-a-vis, we enter into what is known as the Reconstruction era. And that's the period following the Civil War. Now, you have this group of people in the South that are saying, wait a minute, I don't even begin to want to see how Black people, slaves, and particularly as we reconstruct this whole notion of the legitimacy of Black people, they can't be equal to us. So years after the Civil War, then that's when these statues, these Confederate statues start to surface. You know, people have a way of trying to surface things in your face. And so there are mixed messages oftentimes that are being sent. I was talking to my grandson a couple of days ago, and he says, Grandma, he said, because he works in Dallas at the airport, he says, and they were toppling over this big statue. He said, I never even really paid any attention to it. But it was a statue, it was a Confederate statue that represented, that what I call the wrong side of history. Well, I want to dialogue with both of you about this. We've talked a little bit about it. So I want to open up this discussion to you and ask you a question, Dr. Jett. And here's the question. Talk to us about it. Do these Confederate monuments portray an accurate history picture? Is there a difference between learning our history and celebrating our history? Should the oppressed be forced to pay taxes for the maintenance of statues in public arenas when they are symbols of white privilege and Black people are the oppressed? Talk to us.
Well, thank you. And thank you for providing that background, because that's very important to understand the context of which we are having this conversation, because it's not just about history, it is about what's going on today and how we are trying to have an understanding of what it means to be an American, if you will, because it's happening around, July 4th. And so there's so many things that are kind of converging. But first, I want to just add some additional context and say that the country was founded with a document, the Constitution, which was designed to sort of elevate the position of whiteness. And so it's understandable that we have the South, if you will, the Confederacy, kind of holding on to its foundation, its heritage, and also that we have the language today saying, well, this is the heritage of the country, because the slavery compromise was a part of the constitutional development. And so then we have, of course, these struggles, and slavery was about, yes, economics, but it was also about the political structure about taxation and representation. And so when the South is trying to hold on to their slaves, they're also trying to hold on to a position of power within the larger governmental structure. And so when, of course, the Civil War ends, and I think it should be clear to everyone that it wasn't just this kind of messy South versus North divide, because the North very much was benefiting from the institution of slavery.
Absolutely.
That's why you have states and people that live in states like I do. I'm in Indiana and, Ohio and some other places. I see plenty of Confederate flags. And I lived in Alabama for 5 years. I probably see as many Confederate flags in Indiana as I saw in Alabama. And so the symbolic aspect of the Confederacy is representational of a greater identity of whiteness and white power. Now, the reason why we had these monuments actually put into place, not during the Civil War, but afterward, right. And largely sponsored by the Daughters of Confederacy, who had, were longing for the men and the sons and everything that suffered. And so they wanted to play an ode to, I guess you would say, their families or whatever. But one of the reasons why we really had it is because once slavery was over, what happened in the South is that you had more Black people in place than white people. And so that's the beginning sort of voter suppression and the idea that if we actually allow Blacks to be full participants in this country, and we're still having this conversation today, then things can really sort of change. And they got a hint of it when President Obama was elected, although we know that Blacks are really only 12% of the population. So it wasn't just like all Blacks came together and all of a sudden we have a Black president. And also we have plenty of voter suppression. And I include the mass incarceration that we have as also a vehicle for voter suppression. And so the statute and monument was put into place to make sure that we did not, as a collective, acquire any level of power because they already knew that we had physical power just from our survival. And they had some sense that we also had mental power, intellectual power. And so the capacity of all of that coming together was very scary for them. It's still scary today. And by them, I mean just the collective white consciousness and those that celebrate this identity. And so these symbols were put in place at the same time as we had the rise of the Ku Klux Klan, the establishment of putting Black codes into place, preventing Blacks from participating in juries, from voting, from testifying against anyone. All these rules were put into place at the same time just to suppress Black power and the accumulation of Black power. And I'm going to say one other thing real quick to give you a contemporary context, and so that I can let also Dr. Walker weigh into this conversation. But when I was in Alabama, I was looking at post-Black power, post-civil rights Black power, and post-voting rights. So I knew the Voting Rights Act had passed in 1965, that there is a Black belt in a number of states, but I was in Alabama, a series of 10 counties that have predominant Black populations. And I wanted to understand that once the Voting Rights Act passed, were Black people allowed to then use their collective power, since they were the majority, since we have this idea that majority rules, right? Were they able to then use their collective power to affect change for their betterment? And it literally took Black people, the Voting Rights Act was passed in 65. They did not really have the ability to hone their collective power until 1970, 72. And so there was a significant lag in that. And that was because of the antics that are still a part of what I like to call the ghost of slavery, kind of the plantation mentality and the collective idea and fear of Black power, and especially collective Black power when you have Black people occupying majority places that then would allow them, if they all were given the right to vote and had the liberation to vote, then they could really kind of affect change in the system. And so that's why we have all of these things happening in places where Black people are in the majority.
Okay. Thank you for that great overview. Dr. Walker.
Yes.
So on these Confederate statues,
yes,
should those that have been oppressed have to pay taxes as a result of these statues being up? They have to be maintained, or I should say they're being maintained. And then what I want to ask is, what impact does these statues have on contemporary society today, being left up? What do we tell our children if they're all removed? But let's start with that question. Should the oppressed have to pay taxes on statues that represent white supremacy?
Listen, I think I'm going to start by saying something a little bit controversial, but no,
well,
absolutely.
That's why you here.
I don't think we should be paying taxes on that, but I actually don't think that the oppressed and the marginalized and the backs that this country has been built on should be paying taxes at all. Now that's a broad answer, and I have some reasoning behind it, but I kind of want to get back to some of the things that Dr. Jett presented in order to kind of answer it more fully. But no, we definitely should not be paying taxes to upkeep Confederate monuments. Let's be real, they lost the war, and they were rebels to this country. So you can't. What Republicans are trying to do, particularly Donald Trump types of Republicans, what they're trying to do is say two very different things at the same time, which is, yes, we want these monuments because they're a part of our history, but we don't like rebels in this country. We don't like revolutionaries in this country. Stop being too much. Don't ask for too much of a change. But the Confederacy, that's at the core of the Confederacy. They got so upset that they wanted to hold on to their whiteness, that this upper leg that slavery gave them, that they then left the entire country, got their own president, Jefferson Davis, and started a war with the country. And you're upset about Colin Kaepernick kneeling. Like, that's absolutely absurd. You can't say those two things at the same time. But in order to get back to some of the comments, I really like that she uses this, that Dr. Jett used this idea around the enlargements of whiteness. Because when we're talking about history, it is not this straight timeline. It's more of a cyclical. And so if you think of history as like a cyclone, then you think if you are standing in one moment, you can see behind you and you can see ahead of you at the same time. Any one moment in time. Mm-hmm. And so what you're seeing right now in terms of this moment, right, is the reconstruction that you brought up, this moment of reconstruction post-Civil War. What that was huge strides, or at least perceived civil rights gains for African Americans, for the formerly enslaved. So you see the Freedmen's Bureau, this is the first time that we have public education in this country because formerly enslaved people decided, yes, we want to be educated, so you have public education. This is the first time that you have Black people who can sue in court and have standing in a courtroom. This is the first time that you actually have people, this is actually the first time that you have Black senators, Black people voting, Black people who can actually own land and things like that, right? This is the first Reconstruction. And then 8 years later, what you have is what Black historians call the Great Betrayal. But what it is a Tilden Hayes compromise. Two white guys are running for president. They go into a back room, make a side deal because it's a close election. And so what they decide is the guy from the North is going to win, but what we're going to do for the South is pull out federal troops. What happens when federal troops are pulled out is then you have these Black codes. Then this is the first time where it becomes essentially illegal to be Black. You cannot be Black and not be in school. You cannot be Black and not have a job, right? So you have these Black codes. What that moment is called post-Reconstruction. If you look at these ideas, right, where it's like perceived gains for Black citizens, and then a white lash of those gains. Then you look at Barack Obama, a little bit different. So the presidency of Barack Obama is just another Reconstruction. What President Trump is just another post-Reconstruction. And so
well,
let's
kind of get not too far on Obama and Trump right now, because that's a conversation within a conversation.
Sure,
we know that it really is. But I want to kind of stick a little bit to the statues for the moment, and then we'll segue to that point.
The thing I want to say about the statues is that they're not built directly after the Civil War, and that's why. Because they're built during another Reconstruction period. Mm-hmm. Because of this idea of an enlargement of whiteness or an enlargement of Black civil rights citizenship, or perceived so, and then a white lash and saying like, okay, we have to find a way to repress this energy.
Exactly, because here, you have the Southerners lost, the Confederacy. You have the Reconstruction that was going on, but they lost. So now, how do we keep white supremacy in their face? We build monuments, we build statues, we put them in public places. Most of us, when we look at a statue, we look at a monument, we look at a flag, it's symbolic of some form of power. You alluded to it when you talked about, Colin Kaepernick and taking a knee, so to speak. But when we look at these statues, and they have been everywhere, and this is not the first fight against statues most recently, as we all remember some few years back when Mother Emanuel, the massacre with Dylan Roof coming in, sitting in Bible class, and then right after that, murdering all of those attendants. And then shortly thereafter, he poses with a Confederate flag and a gun. Well, what he wanted to do was start a race war, but it did quite the opposite. It turned on him. There's an old saying, what was meant for his good turned out to be actually evil from his perspective. That's not what he wanted, but it was for the good of us. So these symbols play an important role in society. There's this historical backdrop on them. And then when we move it more closer to what is happening now, and we look at the energy that's coalesced around, get these statues down. And that happened because the world saw the egregious murder, the life, as your shirt says, I can't breathe, were the last words of Mr. George Floyd. People left there and it evoked other kinds of symbols. Not only is there, and there's going to be a separate one on, policing, so I won't go too deep on that. But then there's this whole, so what does America stand for? What is systemically wrong when we set up and celebrate statues of people that had oppression going on? So, I want to know from both of you, it gives you an opportunity in your classroom settings, as we talked about Esther. I had mentioned her, but I want to move it into a justice arena. She was a Jewish woman that married the king, but the king did not know her ethnicity. So what her charge was to, actually her uncle encouraged her, perhaps you have come into the kingdom for such a time as this. That is to save your people. Now, here we are in 2020. I'm looking at two beautiful, intelligent, bright professors who hold positions of privilege. Being a professor is a position of privilege. You get to shape people's minds. It may not be happening now, but how will you shape the minds if you build that curriculum into any parts of your history, your historical teaching? Is there something new here that you can bring about? Because you stand at a privileged position to shape people's minds. And Dr. Jett?
Well,
I want to talk to you.
Okay,
so both of you are in a same position. You're professors. you shape the minds of people. And like I said, the backdrop of Esther, what, if anything, will you say or have said about statues? What side of history do they really stand on when you may have other people in your classrooms that think, no, don't remove our heritage. And we're saying, don't keep oppressive symbolism in our face. What's going on in your classrooms as you can shape the minds of people from history? Let me hear it from you.
Would you like me to start? Okay. Well, I teach political science. And of course, history is infused into that, because if I want students to understand why the government is constructed the way it is, then they have to understand the historical backdrop of that. And I also try to get students to think of the why, which is kind of connected to what we are talking about. Like, it's constructed in a particular way to benefit a particular group of people. And it's something that you suggested, Dr. Taylor. But when students come to me, there's a whole lot of, I would call it decolonization and deconstructing that I have to do because I'm teaching college students. So there's some miseducation that I have to deal with. You typically 18, 19 years, that is a starting point. So I have to know what they know at that point and why do they think that that is history. The history that they have often been presented with, and I teach at a predominantly white institution, it's about 89% white, is that they've been taught a history that is written and told from the perspective of what we would call the victors. And those, the history books that they are presented with are presented a position of which they identify as white students. And so having to kind of remove them from that is, of course, a processing that has to take place, because there is some psychological turmoil, if you will, when I say, oh, well, the framers of the Constitution were racist. That the slave trade was supposed to end in the Constitution in 1808, but the last slave ship landed in 1859 in Alabama. And so you've got a whole, 50 years of the slave trade that really wasn't supposed to take place, that was illegal. And then that the Constitution is actually, I would consider it a kind of an illegal document. And also,
thank you.
Because when the Articles of Confederation, which was the document that was actually in place, not all of the states, according to the articles, actually were willing to come to the table and change that. And so they threw that out. They changed the rules of the game, which is something that I also talk about with my students, that those that are in power, they can change the rules of the game to benefit their own ideas. And so, and I teach courses because I have a degree in ethnic studies that I married with political science. I teach courses like Black political thought, and I teach activism. I teach racial and ethnic politics. I teach the U.S. politics from the position of the marginalized, and specifically from the lens of Black people, because that's how I identify. So that is a new presentation to my students. And so we have to, it's kind of a long processing that we go through, but I do anchor it in the literature and the voices of Black people. And one thing I'm just so proud of my people, especially coming out of the institution of slavery, and where we have been deliberately attacked as far as our educational process still to this day, is that we still have been able to tell the story and document our experiences. And so we have very firm ground to stand on when we say, no, that statue that you've put in the middle of the town square actually is inaccurate history. And it does not represent American history. Those are traitors that you're actually celebrating. And we have the data material, whatever you need to validate your information. It's almost like we're using or co-opting the tools of the game in order to present the material in a way that will be digestible. And so that's kind of, so the process I'm going to. When I've taught Intro to U.S. Politics, I have taught it from the position of elite theory, that the whole country was really only designed to benefit the elites, not even all white people, just an elite strata of white people. And that we have all bought into this system in a way that perpetuates it. And Audre Lorde also talks about the fact that we can be a part of systems, buy into systems of our own oppression. And we have to really take a step back and understand how it's working from a system standpoint in order to really interrogate it and understand what we need to do to redress it. And in terms of these monuments also, I will say that it's kind of a distraction because we've got so many other things happening. The pandemic, we have disparities affecting us that we do need to focus on. And then we have this abuse of power taking place, and that needs to be checked. And so we do really need to vote. I can't stress that enough. And then we also have to address the suppression of voting. So we have to fight to make sure that there is a system in place that allows us to participate in the way that we are supposed to, that we are owed. And I also agree with Dr. Walker. I often look at the 10-point platform of the Black Panther Party.
So I know I put that in my dissertation.
And they said that Black people, we should be exempt from taxes.
Yes, and engaging in war, joining the army and all of that. So yes, we are on one accord.
Right on then.
3 accords. We're all
on 3 accords. Yeah.
Exactly. Let me say something on that too for you, Dr. Walker. It became controversial, and I point this to you because about over a year ago, you may recall it, George Washington School, because a lot of our schools are named after these oppressors, Lee School and so forth. So there was this controversy over the mural at George Washington where it shows George Washington on with the Native Americans at his foot, as well as, slaves. So the controversy was, and that was before this recent controversy over statues, should it be removed? Well, there was a big discussion in the school board about that. And one of our leading, and I want to know your position on this, Dr. Walker, one of our leading activist pastors in the area stated, no, leave that mural up, because without that, we don't know the full history. Right. Another leading activist actor said that mural represents art, and art is designed to disturb people sometimes. So that really comes to the question, are we cleansing a part of our history by maybe advocating the removal, if that's the position? Or should there be some form of an appendage put on these statues to tell the real truth? Talk to me, Dr. Walker.
I think there needs to be some sort of middle ground. I agree with Dr. Jett in the sense that they're a bit of a distraction. And in terms of the statues, the thing that I really try to, when I'm teaching about this, because this all started back when Charlottesville happened, where people started talking about the statues, and I was teaching a couple of Black law classes at that time. And one of the things that I really try to get people to grapple with is is this whether it's the mural at in the city or whether it's about the statues, are they an accurate representation of what the United States is? And can the United States be the United States while disentangling itself from white supremacy? That is, can the United States...
Oh, that's a question.
Can the United States, as the United States, exist without white supremacy? As a critical race theorist, I don't think that it can. I think that it thrives on institutional racism. And so these statues, as offensive as they are to people, I understand that, and I'm empathetic to that. At the same time, they are an accurate representation of what is in the White House. George Washington is an accurate representation of President Trump trying to build a wall when most immigrants come on a plane. Like, this is not even making any sense at this point. It's simply white supremacy. And so if that white supremacy itself is at the core of the United States and the way that the United States functions, then will tearing down a statue really change anything at all?
It doesn't attack the systemic problems that we have. You have this bronze statue standing there, so we remove it, but we still need to talk about systemic racism, and that needs to be really addressed. Dr. Jett, you said something a few minutes ago that sometimes we participate in our own, well, you didn't say demise, but part of the system itself. Now, this is going to be probably controversial. So in churches, when we have Ushers Day, we do the Ushers March, and we do it on the battlefield. We are soldiers in the in the army. This is the catch. We're going to hold up the blood-stained banner. I want to stop right there. The blood-stained banner was one of the banners that the Confederacy used itself. Do we know the history of the lyrics of the songs that we sometimes sing? So we do it without really knowing the historical background on that. I bet you if I were to bring that up in an ushers meeting, I might get run out. But yet still, I think it might be an awakening moment to sometimes of what we do. We don't understand what we're doing. But I believe in all of this, as Dr. Thompson said. We can't just talk problematic. We have to send. We have always been a people of hope because we started from being, brought here, kidnapped from the motherland, brought here, been made slaves. And through it all, God has been with us. We have gone through a lot. Where's the hope as we begin to see? And I saw an array of hope as I saw white hands and black hands being joined together during, the protests. But there was a bit of skepticism that I had as well, because some might have been used for offensive purposes. They use that for other reasons. But more importantly, I want to talk now to both of you, where's the hope that we leave people, not just from the past, but as we go forward in history? These statues are there, but it's more than statues. It's more than flags. It's more than symbols. I just believe we're one of the most mighty people that's ever been on the planet of Earth. I just love being who I am. Talk to us about the hope. Even from a theological perspective, talk to us about hope. Jesse Jackson reminds us to keep hope alive.
I'll take this one. I think when you're looking at this particular moment, and I'll be quite honest, and I wonder if you both are this way too. It kind of, because I am in history so much, I understand that there have been moments like this. There have been moments that look similar to this. And so I have a healthy bit of skepticism as well. At the same time, I am seeing things right now from young people in particular that I have never seen before. I have gotten questions that I have never gotten before. Professor Walker, can you tell me what to read? Do you know how hard it is to get my college students to read? And now they're asking me for extra reading.
What can I read, huh?
Right. Extra reading and things like that. I mean, I get text messages, I get emails regularly from students saying, what can I do in this moment? If I'm going into health, what can I do to respond? If I'm going into business, what can I do to respond? And not just my students. I do a bit of work with corporations and companies on the larger side who want to respond to their employees in the right way. And they'll say like, okay, tell me what I don't know. And that is one of the best starting points. So in terms of in terms of hope, I am really amazed, especially with some of the young people who are out every day and saying, like, listen, I know my rights and stop killing me.
Yes.
That at a point, like, to stand up when you know what kind of threat it is to stand up as a Black person and say, stop doing this to me, is immensely powerful and hopeful.
Oh, that is so wonderful. That is so wonderful. Dr. Jett.
Yeah,
on hope itself from your perspective, because we can't leave people in a dark place. We teach a dark history, but we must shed light in a positive way.
Yes, I have a few things that I've been thinking about, and also that Dr. Walker has me considering, and that I do see a lot of courage and courageous acts.
Yes.
And some strategic activism, which I always like to witness. And so while the media might paint some of the protesting, they like to give it a broad brush and call it, and demean it. I see it as very conscious acts. That they've been using social media to organize in real effective ways. And it's amazing the number of people and the different and people from different backgrounds that can come together. But what I am hopeful about is that the Black voice, the young Black voice, is still centered in that engagement, and that there is a recognition that we are the ones, because we are the ones that are affected, we are the ones that know what needs to be done in order to affect change. And now I do want to say something about the church, because this is a moment for the church to, and I'm not talking about Allen Temple in particular. And as you know, I was raised in Sojourner Truth Presbyterian Church with a understanding of Black liberation theologies. And so that's what kind of forms my own perspective of what Jesus is supposed to do and actually even supposed to look like.
And you're one of the founders of Sojourner Truth. Let us say that for the record.
But yes, I embrace that. Right.
Let the record reflect.
Yes, exactly. And what the church needs to do is provide the space for young people to safely organize and to come together and to lead what is happening right now. Give them, empower young people, like was done in the Civil Rights Movement. Those were young people that were empowered and that were leaders and that were on the forefront. And so the church really needs to kind of get out of the way. It's been, kind of generally speaking, the Black church has been somewhat asleep. And I have to be honest, I have been quite bored with the church. In fact, I see more things happening that Jesus would approve of outside of the church rather than in the church.
Listen at you, doctor.
2 hours in church on a Sunday, that's 2 hours that I'm thinking, or 4, whatever it is that you guys spend. I'm Presbyterian, so I like it to be 2. That, I'm thinking to myself, wow, I could have been reading. I could have been, engaged in something else. I could have been, in dialogue. I could have been planning. So if that is not happening, if my soul and my spirit isn't being fed from an activist standpoint and personal about what is going on, because this is very traumatic for the Black community generally, if it's the church is not standing behind the key organizers, which are the young people, then the church really needs to get out of the way. And so, and so that's really what the role of the church should be right now. It should be an organizing, safe space to address all of the disparities, all the things that are happening right now for Black people, and to provide that support and resources so that, that can continue, so the pressure can continue, because this is long-term work. This is not short-term work. It's a marathon.
So your hope is that you see there is an opportunity, not so much that the church has to just get out of the way, because we always need everything we've done as Black people started in the sanctity of community and church being one. So there is that hope, and we can look at things a different way, not so much disappear, but there is this opportunity for the church to engage in theological, social justice issues and support the young people, because the mantra of Black Lives Matter has just taken off, and it started outside of the four walls of the church.
Yeah, I mean, it was started by 4 Black queer identified women. And so the church, and when I said, I mean, the church should get out of it, the church needs to get out of its own way.
I understood.
The church that it can be by actually centering young Black voices who are leading what is happening right now.
And I understand.
If I can just add, you know, when we look back at historical Black movements, I wonder if us being such a spiritual people, if we can really have a successful movement without a spiritual base. And young people are looking for that. I am a millennial too. I'm on the older side of millennials, but I'm a millennial too. And I'm not saying it's happened at Allen Temple, but when I've come to different spiritual spaces, Black churches with particular ideas, there's an immediate shutdown sometimes that happens. And young people are actually looking for that spiritual base to really guide the movement, just like the historical ones have.
Yeah,
I agree. You know, I look at our pastor, a young, gifted Black female.
Yes.
And when she has been asked the question, you know, well, what are you doing? How are you leading the people with the church closed down? Listen at this. Her response is, the church is not closed down. The people are the church, and we are reaching people. Kingdom building is going on. Activism is going on. We've been out there with the protests, just even through technology. Look at us having a dialogue. We haven't shut down Bible class. We have even gone through Bible study from having 40 people perhaps on a Thursday night in the gathered community, as they say, within the four walls. But now we're reaching hundreds and hundreds of people. But that comes from a young mind thinking out of the box. Right. So, you know, my hope, if I might add, as I see, is that I do see an array of sunshine peering through. I see a bit of Blacks and whites coming together. Are we always going to have racism? Of course we are. Are we always going to have sexism? Of course we are. But I don't see right now so much, no matter what Trump says, his own words are beating him up. This world is moving forward. Maybe not at the speed we want it to do, but I want to encourage the listeners just to know, and I believe our time is up. I don't know why. I don't see a clock. Let's see. It says 7:45, almost close to 8. You know, I got to do the real thing here. Almost 8 o'clock. So, yeah, we probably need to shut it down. But I'm just enamored, and I am just so encouraged by the fact that no matter what happened in the civil rights movement, which was all good, the movement for progression has not stopped. Our people have always sprung forward from protests. Mm-hmm. It is out of protest, out of the ashes, we have sprung up. And so I just say we keep hope alive. And I say to the people my age and to the people younger, you know, is that we're living in what we call, Charles Dickens said, it could be the worst of times, but I also see some of the best of times. I see hope. I see opportunity. I want to thank you both for being here. You know, we could go on and on and on, but time does not really permit that. And I just like to close with the word of prayer. Is that all right?
Yes.
Okay. And I'm praying with those in our further than just us three. Gracious God, we just come right now in the name of Jesus, thanking you for the opportunity to be able to come together to discuss things of the nature of how statues have been meant to be oppressive. But what these statues have done is caused a leap of faith and activism on the part of young people. So through the pandemic of COVID-19, through the pandemic of economics, people have lost their jobs. Through the pandemic of young people being shut up and having to learn in the bedrooms, many of them don't have computers. There is hope, because you said in the word is that, we look at hope, we look at faith. It's the same yesterday as it was today and will be forevermore. Mm-hmm. We thank you for this opportunity. We ask a blessing on the people in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you so much, Doctors Jett and Walker. And good evening to both of you.
Good evening.
All right. Thank you.